AITA for refusing to sell my inherited cottage to fund my sister's celebration of life wedding venue? I, 32M, have been a groundskeeper at Willowbrook Historic Cemetery for 8 years. Before anyone asks, no, I'm not depressed. No, I don't have a morbid fascination with death. I maintain 47 acres of rolling hills, century-old oak trees, Victorian-era monuments, and memorial gardens that bring comfort to thousands of grieving families every year. I love my job. I really do. I wake up at 5 a.m. to water the roses before the summer heat sets in. I spend my afternoons carefully trimming the grass around headstones that date back to the Civil War. I've memorized the names of veterans, children, beloved grandparents. I know which plots get visitors every Sunday and which ones haven't seen flowers in decades, so I plant wildflowers there myself. I've held the hands of widows who couldn't bear to leave after burials. I've guided children through our butterfly garden while their parents said goodbye to relatives they barely knew. This isn't just a job. It's a calling. But my family, they've never seen it that way. My parents, Richard, 60M, and Pamela, 58F, have spent my entire adult life treating my career choice like some sort of embarrassing phase. When I graduated from my horticulture program and announced I'd been hired at Willowbrook, my mother literally asked if I was going through something. My father didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. Meanwhile, my younger sister Claire, 28F, works as a wedding venue coordinator at an upscale garden estate called Belrose Manor. She books champagne tastings and coordinates string quartets and helps brides choose between ivory and cream napkins. According to my parents, she creates new beginnings while I dwell in death. Those exact words. Spoken at Thanksgiving. In front of my grandmother. 2 years ago. But that's not even what prompted this post. Here's the situation. My grandfather, Harold, passed away 3 years ago. We were incredibly close. He was a World War II veteran who served as a medic in the Pacific, and he spent the rest of his life as a hospice volunteer. He understood that death wasn't something to fear or hide from, it was something to honor. He was the only person in my family who attended my graduation ceremony. He came to Willowbrook once a month just to walk the grounds with me and tell me stories about the soldiers buried there. In his will, Grandpa Harold left me his cottage on Cedar Lake. It's a modest 2-bedroom place, about 1,200 square feet, on a half-acre lot with water access. He'd paid it off decades ago. The property is currently valued at around $190,000. Claire got $50,000 in cash and some antique jewelry. My parents got his vintage car collection and the contents of his investment accounts. Everyone received something meaningful. But the cottage, that was mine. I've been living there for the past 3 years. I've renovated the kitchen, replaced the roof, built a small dock. It's become my sanctuary after long days of physical labor and emotional weight. I host barbecues for fellow cemetery workers. I kayak at sunrise. I planted a memorial garden for Grandpa in the backyard. Last week, my parents invited me to Sunday dinner. I should have known something was wrong when my mother actually set a place for me at the table instead of telling me to grab something from the kitchen. They waited until after dessert. Marcus, my father began, using his serious business voice, we need to discuss something as a family. Claire was sitting across from me with her fiancé, Derek, 29M, who works in pharmaceutical sales and owns 3 different pairs of boat shoes. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Claire has found the perfect venue for her wedding, my mother said, practically glowing. Belrose Manor has an opening in September for their grand garden package. That's great, I said carefully. Congratulations. The package is $150,000, my father continued. And while Derek's family has generously offered to contribute $55,000, that still leaves a significant gap. I felt the familiar weight settling in my chest. I knew where this was going. We've already committed our savings to help, my mother added. But Claire deserves the wedding of her dreams. She's worked so hard, coordinating all those beautiful celebrations for others. It's finally her turn. What does this have to do with me? I asked, though I already knew. Claire finally looked up. Mark, I was hoping that you might consider selling Grandpa's cottage. Even just the land. The property is worth at least $190,000, and if you sold it and gave me $95,000, you'd still have half for yourself. You could rent an apartment closer to work. It would be more practical anyway. I sat there in silence. Think about it, my father said. That cottage is just sitting there, tied up in one person's use. Claire is building a life, a future, a family. And what am I building? I asked quietly. My mother reached across the table and patted my hand like I was a confused child. Sweetheart, We know your job is important to someone. But Claire celebrates life. She brings joy. You work in a cemetery, dear. You spend your days surrounded by death. Wouldn't you rather contribute to something happy? She celebrates life while you dwell on death, my father added, like he was reading from a prepared script. This is a chance to be part of something meaningful. I stared at them. At Claire, who was studying her engagement ring. At Derek, who was scrolling his phone under the table. At my parents, who had never once asked about the family I'd helped bury that morning, a young mother of 2 who died in a car accident. I'd spent an hour making sure her grave was surrounded by white lilies because her husband mentioned they were her favorite. No, I said. No. My mother's voice cracked. Grandpa left me that cottage because he wanted me to have it. It's not a piggy bank. It's not a down payment on Claire's party. It's my home. My father's face reddened. This is exactly the kind of selfish attitude I'd expect from someone who works with the dead. No understanding of family. No sense of generosity. I donate 15% of my salary to the cemetery's indigent burial fund, I said quietly. I spent my vacation last year rebuilding the Veterans Memorial section. I've never asked any of you for anything. Because you have nothing we want, Claire said suddenly, her voice sharp. You have no ambition, no future, just graves and gardens. Grandpa felt sorry for you. That's why he gave you the cottage. We all know it. The table went silent. I stood up, folded my napkin, and placed it beside my plate. Thank you for dinner, I said. I won't be selling the cottage. I drove home to Cedar Lake, parked in the driveway, and sat on the dock until the stars came out. I tried to remember Grandpa's voice, telling me about the men he'd watched die in field hospitals, about how holding someone's hand at the end was a privilege most people never understood. Caring for the dead is holy work, he used to say. Don't let anyone tell you different. I'm not asking if I'm the asshole. I know I'm not. I guess I'm just asking, does anyone else feel like their family sees them as less than because they chose a different path? Because they work with endings instead of beginnings? I maintain a peaceful memorial space for grieving families every day. I help people say goodbye to the people they love most. And my own family treats me like I'm some kind of ghoul for doing it. Sorry for the long post. I just needed to get this out. Edit. Thank you all so much for the overwhelming support. I've read every comment, and I'm genuinely moved. Several people suggested I look through Grandpa's old papers to see if there's anything that might explain why he left me the cottage specifically. I'm going up to the attic this weekend to go through his boxes. I'll update if I find anything. Update 1. I found something. I didn't expect to be updating so soon, but something happened that I need to share. After my original post, dozens of you suggested I look through my grandfather's belongings for anything that might explain his decision to leave me the cottage. Several people pointed out that estate attorneys sometimes receive letters explaining bequest reasoning, and that Grandpa might have left documentation of his wishes. I spent Saturday morning in the cottage attic, going through the boxes I'd moved there after Grandpa's passing. Most of it was typical stuff: old photographs, military records, discharge papers, letters from my grandmother before she passed in 2008. Beautiful, nostalgic items that made me miss him terribly. Then I found his journals. My grandfather kept a diary from 1962 until 2 weeks before his death. Dozens of leather-bound books filled with his careful handwriting. I'd seen them before but never felt comfortable reading them. They seemed too private, too intimate. But given everything that happened, I decided to look through the final volume. I found the entry I was looking for dated 8 months before he died. He'd titled it, "On the Matter of My Estate." I'm going to transcribe the relevant section here, because it changed everything. April 12th. Spoke with Patterson, his attorney, today about finalizing my will. He asked me to explain my reasoning for certain bequests, in case anyone contests. I told him the truth, that I've thought about this carefully for many years. Marcus will receive the cottage. I know Richard and Pamela will be angry. I know they believe Claire is the favored one, the successful one, because she works with weddings and flowers and beginnings. They think my grandson chose the wrong path, that there's something strange about a young man who tends to graves. They don't understand. They never will. Marcus is the only one in this family who understands what I learned in those field hospitals 70 years ago, that caring for the dead teaches you to honor life better than those who only celebrate it. Anyone can throw rice at a wedding. Anyone can clink champagne glasses and wish couples well. But to tend to the resting places of the departed? To ensure that a widow's husband is surrounded by flowers she can't afford? To know that every headstone represents someone who was loved, who lived, who mattered? That takes a soul that has looked death in the eye and found compassion instead of fear. I've watched Marcus grow into this work. I've seen him kneel beside graves and speak to the dead like they can hear him, and perhaps they can. I've watched him learn the names of the forgotten. I've watched him become the kind of man I always hoped he'd be, gentle, strong, and unafraid of endings. The cottage is a sanctuary. It's where I went when the nightmares came, when I could still hear the screams of boys I couldn't save. Marcus needs a sanctuary too. His work demands it. Claire will have her celebrations. She'll have her weddings and her future and her champagne toasts. But she hasn't learned yet that all beginnings contain endings, and all endings make way for new beginnings. Perhaps she never will. The cottage goes to Marcus because he understands what I could never teach the others, that honoring the dead is the highest form of honoring the living. If anyone asks, tell them that. I sat in the attic for a long time after reading that. My grandfather saw me. He understood what I do, why I do it, and why it matters. He didn't leave me the cottage out of pity. He left it to me because he recognized something in my work that my parents have never been able to see. I called my Aunt Martha, Grandpa's younger sister, who's in her mid-80s and lives in Arizona. I asked her if she knew about the journals. Of course I knew, she said. Harold told me what he wrote about you. He wanted to make sure someone would tell you if you ever doubted yourself. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because you didn't need it sooner, sweetheart. You needed it now. I've made a decision. I'm going to read that entry aloud at the next family dinner. I've already asked my mother if I can host. I told her I wanted to clear the air about the cottage situation. She was thrilled, probably thinking I'd changed my mind. I haven't. But I think it's time my family heard Grandpa's words, in his own voice, about what my work actually means. I'll update after. Edit. Several people are asking if I'm nervous about the family dinner. Honestly, no. I'm at peace. Whatever happens, Grandpa's words have already changed everything for me. I finally understand that my worth isn't determined by my family's approval. But I still think they need to hear this, not for me, but for themselves. If they can't understand, that's okay. But they should at least be given the chance. Update 2. The family dinner. The family dinner happened 3 nights ago. I've been processing ever since. I spent all day Saturday preparing. I cleaned the cottage until it gleamed. I made Grandpa's famous pot roast recipe, the one he learned from his mother and taught me when I was 12. I set the table with his old china, the pieces with the blue flowers that he and Grandma used on their anniversary every year. When my parents arrived, my mother looked around like she was appraising the property for sale. It's quaint, she said, setting down a bottle of wine she'd brought. Smaller than I remembered. It's perfect for me, I said. Claire and Derek arrived 20 minutes late. Claire was wearing a new engagement ring upgrade. Apparently Derek had surprised her with a larger stone. She made sure to mention it 3 times during appetizers. We made small talk through the salad course. My father asked pointed questions about property taxes and waterfront regulations, clearly still angling toward the sale. My mother kept mentioning how expensive weddings were these days, how every family has to sacrifice for milestone events. I waited until we were finished eating. Before dessert, I said, standing up, I wanted to share something with everyone. I found Grandpa's journals while going through the attic. The table went quiet. He kept a diary for decades, I continued. And I found an entry where he explained why he left me this cottage. I think you all need to hear it. Marcus, my mother began, her voice carrying a warning. Please, I said. Just listen. I opened the journal to the page I'd bookmarked. I'd practiced reading it aloud a dozen times, but my hand still trembled slightly as I began. Marcus will receive the cottage, I read. I know Richard and Pamela will be angry. I read the entire entry. Every word. I kept my voice steady, even when I reached the parts about caring for the dead being holy work. Even when I described Grandpa's nightmares from the war. Even when I reached the final line, honoring the dead is the highest form of honoring the living. When I finished, the room was silent. I looked up. My mother was staring at her plate, her jaw tight. My father had pushed back from the table, arms crossed, face unreadable. Derek was examining his phone again. But Claire was crying. Not the delicate, pretty tears she usually produced for sympathy. These were real tears, the kind that come from somewhere deep and uncontrolled. Her makeup was running. Her shoulders were shaking. Claire, I said, setting down the journal. He's right, she whispered. What? My mother turned to her sharply. Grandpa's right. Claire wiped her face with her napkin, smearing mascara everywhere. I've been coordinating weddings for 5 years. 5 years of garden venues and floral arrangements and string quartets. And not once, did I ever think about where those gardens come from. Who maintains them? Who cares for them? She looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before, recognition. Someone like you, Marcus. Someone like you plants those roses and trims those hedges and makes sure everything is beautiful. And I book the venue. I take the credit. I tell brides about new beginnings while standing in gardens that exist because someone quietly tends them every single day. Claire, sweetheart, my mother reached for her, but Claire pulled away. I called you a grave digger, Claire said to me, her voice breaking. I said Grandpa felt sorry for you. But he didn't, did he? He was proud of you. He understood something about your work that I never bothered to learn. Claire, do you know what I do when someone mentions that a wedding venue used to be a cemetery? I change the subject. I act like it's something shameful. But people used to bury their loved ones in gardens because they wanted them surrounded by beauty. By life. Death and life aren't opposites, are they? They're part of the same thing. She was rambling now, thoughts tumbling out faster than she could organize them. That's what Grandpa meant, she continued. All beginnings contain endings. All endings make way for new beginnings. I've been standing in spaces that honor both, and I never even noticed. My father cleared his throat. Claire, this is very emotional, but... No, Dad. Claire's voice hardened. You asked Marcus to sell his home so I could have a fancy party. $150,000 party. In a garden that someone like him maintains. While he lives in a cottage that his grandfather, the man who held dying soldiers' hands, left him specifically because Marcus is the only one in this family who understands what that means. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. I'm not taking Marcus's cottage, Claire said finally. I'm not taking anything. I don't want Belrose Manor anymore. What? Derek looked up from his phone for the first time. Claire, we put down a deposit. We'll lose the deposit. I don't care. But the wedding will happen somewhere else. Claire stood up and walked around the table to where I was standing. She pulled me into a hug so fierce I couldn't breathe for a moment. I'm sorry, she whispered in my ear. I'm so sorry, Marcus. I've been a terrible sister. I hugged her back. It's okay. It's not. But I'm going to do better. She pulled away, wiped her eyes again, and turned to our parents. We're leaving, she said. Derek, get the car. Claire, my mother started. I need time to think, Claire interrupted. About a lot of things. They left 20 minutes later. My parents stayed another hour, mostly sitting in uncomfortable silence. When they finally gathered their things to leave, my father paused at the door. That journal, he said stiffly. I'd like to borrow it sometime. To read the other entries. It wasn't an apology. But it was something. I'll think about it, I said. After they were gone, I sat on the dock with a glass of wine and watched the moon rise over Cedar Lake. For the first time in years, I felt like my grandfather was sitting beside me. Thank you, I said out loud, to the water, to the stars, to whatever part of him might still be listening. I'll update again when there's more to share. Final update. 5 months later. It's been 5 months since the family dinner that changed everything. I've been waiting to post this final update until I had the full picture, and now I do. Where do I even begin? Let's start with Claire. After she left my cottage that night, she went home and spent 3 days in what Derek described as a revelation spiral. She called me 4 times during that period, asking questions I'd never expected her to ask. How did I choose cemetery work? What does a typical day look like? Do families ever thank me personally? Do I ever feel sad, or does the work bring me peace? She wasn't interrogating me. She was genuinely trying to understand. A week later, she canceled the Belrose Manor booking entirely. She lost the $12,000 deposit. Derek's parents were furious. My parents were confused. But Claire was calm, more calm than I'd ever seen her. I don't want a performance, she told me over coffee. I want a ceremony. There's a difference. She started researching alternative venues. I offered suggestions, expecting her to choose something modest but still elegant, a small botanical garden, maybe, or a friend's backyard. I didn't expect what she actually chose. Claire booked her wedding at Riverside Public Garden, a community space that I volunteer at once a month. It's free to reserve, maintained entirely by local volunteers and the City Parks Department, and surrounded by a wrought iron fence that separates it from the historic cemetery next door. It felt right, she explained when she told me. A garden next to a cemetery. Beginnings and endings, side by side. That's what Grandpa was talking about, isn't it? She asked me to walk her down the aisle. I know. I had to read her message twice before I believed it. When I asked what about Dad, she said she'd already discussed it with our parents. Dad will give a toast at the reception, she told me. But you're the one who taught me what this day actually means. You should be the one standing beside me. The wedding happened last month. It was small, 60 people, folding chairs, wildflowers in mason jars. Claire wore a simple white dress she found at a consignment shop. Derek wore a suit without boat shoes. The ceremony was performed by a friend who got ordained online, and the vows were handwritten and honest. But the moment that broke me, the moment I'll remember for the rest of my life, came during Claire's speech at the reception. She stood up, champagne glass in hand, and turned to face me. I need to thank someone, she said, her voice steady but emotional. My brother, Marcus. The guests turned to look at me. I felt my face flush. Most of you know Marcus as the guy who works at Willowbrook Cemetery. Some of you probably think that's a strange job, maybe even a sad one. I used to think so too. I used to think my brother was wasting his life tending to the dead while I was out celebrating the living. She paused, collecting herself. 5 months ago, Marcus shared something with our family. Words from our grandfather, a man who understood death better than anyone I've ever known, because he spent his life honoring both the dying and the living. Grandpa wrote that caring for the dead teaches you to honor life better than those who only celebrate it. He said that Marcus, my quiet, humble, hard-working brother, understood something the rest of us had never learned. She wiped her eyes. I've spent 5 years coordinating elaborate weddings in fancy venues. I've watched couples spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on single days, believing that the size of the celebration reflects the depth of their love. But Marcus spends every day in a place where love is permanent, where families come back week after week, year after year, to visit the people they lost, where the flowers never stop, and the mourning never really ends, and someone has to tend to all of it with care and compassion. She raised her glass. Marcus, you taught me that endings and beginnings are both sacred. You taught me that honoring the dead is how we honor the living. You taught me that this, she gestured to the simple garden around us, is enough. More than enough. Because what matters isn't the venue or the budget. What matters is that we're here, together, celebrating love in a place where someone like you made beauty possible. She smiled at me through her tears. Thank you for being my brother. Thank you for walking me down the aisle. And thank you for being exactly who Grandpa knew you were. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember crossing the garden to hug her. But I remember the applause, and I remember Derek shaking my hand and saying, I get it now, and I remember my father's face, not angry, not disapproving, but something softer. Something that might have been pride. After the wedding, things continued to shift. Claire has changed her entire approach to venue coordination. She started partnering with local cemeteries that have garden sections available for events. She learned that cemetery garden weddings are actually growing in popularity. Couples who want to honor deceased relatives, families who find peace in the symbolism, people who understand that love doesn't end at death. She calls them threshold ceremonies, events held in spaces where life and death intersect. Her first cemetery garden wedding was last week. A young couple whose bride lost her mother to cancer wanted to get married in the cemetery garden where her mother is buried. Claire coordinated the entire event, working with the cemetery groundskeepers to ensure everything was beautiful and respectful. I finally understand what you do, she told me afterward. You don't just maintain spaces. You hold space. For grief, for love, for memory. That's sacred work. As for my parents, we're not perfect. We may never be perfect. But my father has started asking about my work in a way that feels genuine rather than dismissive. He visited Willowbrook last month, walked the grounds with me, and stood silently in front of the Veterans Memorial I helped rebuild. Your grandfather would have loved this, he said quietly. It wasn't an apology. But it was something. My mother sent me a card last week. Inside, she'd written, I'm sorry I didn't see you clearly before. I'm trying now. It's not much. But it's a start. The cottage remains mine. I've added a small memorial plaque near the dock, where Grandpa used to sit and fish. It reads, Caring for the dead teaches you to honor life better than those who only celebrate it. I read it every morning before work. I started this journey feeling crushed and unseen. I felt like my family would never understand the value of what I do, that I'd always be the grave digger compared to my sister's celebration of life. But here's what I've learned. Sometimes the people who dismiss you aren't doing it out of cruelty. Sometimes they're doing it out of fear. Fear of death, fear of endings, fear of anything that reminds them that celebration is temporary but love is permanent. My grandfather knew this. He spent his final years trying to teach it to anyone who would listen. And in the end, his words reached the people who needed them most. I don't work with death. I work with love. Every headstone I tend represents someone who was cherished. Every flower I plant is a promise that they won't be forgotten. Every family I guide through their grief is a reminder that endings are not failures, they're passages. Claire gets that now. My parents are learning. And I finally know, beyond any doubt, that my work matters. Not because the world celebrates it, but because the people who've lost someone need it. Because the dead deserve to be honored. Because caring for endings is just another way of caring for beginnings. Grandpa was right. He was always right. Thank you all for following this journey with me. Thank you for the messages and the kindness and the support. Thank you for seeing me when my family couldn't. I'm going to tend my gardens now. Final edit. Since several people asked, yes, Claire's first cemetery garden wedding was a success, and she's already booked 3 more. She started a small consulting service specifically for threshold ceremonies, and is partnering with cemeteries and memorial gardens across the state. She told me last week that her new clients often ask about Willowbrook, and I've started giving private tours for couples who are considering the space for their own ceremonies. We're building something together now, honoring both endings and beginnings, just like Grandpa always wanted. It feels like healing. It feels like home.